The time a single rifleman delayed a division. What happened next? This is not hyperbole, but a meticulously documented incident from the final, desperate weeks of the war in Europe. In April 1945, as the Allied armies surged into the heart of the crumbling Third Reich, a lone American infantryman found himself holding a position that strategic maps deemed untenable. With his company decimated and forced to withdraw, he would make a solitary, defiant choice: to stay. For one critical afternoon, armed with little more than his M1 Garand rifle, a few grenades, and sheer, stubborn courage, he would engage in a deadly duel with the spearhead of a retreating German division. His actions, a masterclass in individual initiative and marksmanship, would create a bottleneck of confusion and fear, buying precious time for his comrades to regroup and for reinforcements to arrive. This is the extraordinary account of Private First Class Leonard Lenny Kowalski of Company G, 2nd Battalion, 331st Infantry Regiment, 83rd Infantry Division, and his one-man stand at a nondescript railway bridge over the Saal River. To understand the immense pressure bearing down on PFC Kowalski that April day, we must first examine the strategic avalanche that was the Allied advance into central Germany. By mid-April 1945, the Wehrmacht was a shattered force, its units a patchwork of battered regulars, teenage conscripts from the Volkssturm, and fanatical SS holdouts, all conducting a chaotic fighting retreat towards perceived national redoubts. The U.S. Ninth Army, to which the 83rd Thunderbolt Division belonged, was driving eastward with tremendous momentum, its objective to reach the Elbe River and link up with the advancing Soviet forces. The 331st Infantry Regiment was operating on the southern flank of this advance, moving through the rolling, wooded hills of Thuringia. Their immediate opposition was the fragmented remnants of the German 11th Panzer Division, once an elite formation, now reduced to a desperate, mobile rearguard of perhaps 2,000 men, supported by a handful of surviving Panzer IV and Jagdpanzer IV tanks. Their orders were simple: delay the American advance at all costs to allow other units and staff to escape east. Leonard Kowalski, a 22-year-old from Buffalo, New York, was, by all accounts, an unassuming soldier. Of Polish descent, he was quiet, observant, and possessed an almost preternatural calm under fire. His fellow G's in the 2nd Platoon called him the Pole with affectionate respect. He was a rifleman carrying the standard M1 Garand, a weapon whose distinctive ping when the clip ejected was as familiar as his own heartbeat. He was not an officer, not a hero seeking glory. He was a dependable cog in the vast machine of war. On the morning of April 13, 1945, Company G was ordered to seize and hold the village of Kleindorf, a cluster of stone houses straddling a key east-west road and, more importantly, guarding a single-lane stone railway bridge over the Saal River. Intelligence suggested the bridge was a crucial escape route for the retreating 11th Panzer Division. The company moved in at dawn, meeting only scattered, ineffectual resistance from a handful of German stragglers. By 1,000 hours, they had secured the village and established a perimeter. The railway bridge, a sturdy, arched structure of weathered stone, stood intact at the eastern edge of town. Lieutenant Avery, the platoon leader, positioned 2 squads to cover the bridge's approaches from prepared positions in a railway maintenance shed and behind a low stone wall. The rest of the company began fortifying houses in the village itself. The mood was tense, but confident. They had taken their objective. Now they had to hold it. Little did they know that within hours, the full weight of a panicked German division would be funneled directly toward their position, and one man would be forced to bear the brunt of its fury. The first signs of serious trouble came just before noon. From their positions, the men of Company G began to hear it, a low, growing rumble from the dense pine forest east of the river. It was the sound of dozens of engines, trucks, half-tracks, and the unmistakable metallic grind of tank tracks. Then came the sight. Through field glasses, Lieutenant Avery watched as a disordered but substantial German column began to emerge from the tree line on the far side of the Saal. There were Opel Blitz trucks packed with troops, horse-drawn wagons laden with crates, staff cars, and at least 4 Panzer IV tanks moving at the head of the column. This was no ragged band of stragglers. This was a major formation in retreat, and their intended route across the Saal was the very bridge Company G now held. The lead German elements, spotting the American positions in Kleindorf, immediately deployed. Tanks took up hull-down positions on a slight rise, and German infantry began to fan out along the riverbank, seeking cover. A fierce firefight erupted. German MG-42 machine guns chattered, their high rate of fire sending streams of bullets pinging off the stone walls of the village. The Panzer IVs began to methodically shell the American strong points with their 75mm main guns. One shell scored a direct hit on the railway maintenance shed, killing 3 Americans and wounding several more. Lieutenant Avery, realizing his 2 squads at the bridgehead were about to be overrun and the bridge lost, made a difficult call. He radioed Company HQ in the village center. "We cannot hold the bridge position. Request permission to pull back to the village and defend from the houses. Repeat, cannot hold the bridge." The company commander, Captain Miller, assessing the overwhelming force arrayed against them and fearing his entire company would be cut off and destroyed, agreed. The order came down. Abandon the bridgehead positions and fall back to the village on the double. The covering force would provide suppressing fire while the men at the bridge disengaged. The withdrawal was a nightmare. Under intense machine gun and tank fire, the surviving Americans from the 2 squads began scrambling back across 200 yards of open ground toward the nearest houses. German infantry, seeing the retreat, started to advance, firing as they came. It was in this maelstrom that PFC Leonard Kowalski's war took its dramatic turn. He was part of the covering force, lying behind the low stone wall with his buddy, PFC Joe Ricci. As Ricci rose to run, a burst of MG-42 fire caught him in the side. He went down hard. Kowalski crawled to him. Ricci was alive, but badly wounded, bleeding profusely. "Go, Lenny. Get out of here," Ricci gasped. Kowalski looked back. The last of his platoon was disappearing into an alley between 2 houses. The first German infantrymen were already at the far end of the bridge, moving cautiously but steadily. In that split second, Kowalski faced a choice no training manual could ever prepare him for. Leave his friend and run, ensuring his own survival, or stay and face certain death or capture. He made his decision. He dragged Ricci into a deep drainage culvert that ran parallel to the railroad tracks, about 15 yards from the bridge's western abutment. It was a concrete trough about 4 feet deep, overgrown with weeds. It offered cover from direct fire, but was a trap if flanked. He propped Ricci against the side, applied a fresh bandage from his own kit, and gave him a shot of morphine. "Just hang on, Joe. Help's coming." But as he looked up, he saw the truth. No help was coming. The Americans were fully committed to defending the village. The bridge and the 2 of them had been ridden off. He was now behind the forward line of his own company, with a wounded man and a German division about to cross the river. Kowalski peered over the lip of the culvert. The lead elements of German infantry, emboldened by the American withdrawal, were now streaming across the bridge in a loose column. A Panzer IV, its engine roaring, began to nudge its way onto the stone span. If that tank got across, it would smash into the village and shred the American defenses. Time seemed to slow. Kowalski's mind, usually so calm, raced. He had 8 rounds in his Garand. He had 2 fragmentation grenades on his belt. That was it. He couldn't stop a division. But maybe, just maybe, he could make them think they were walking into a trap. He settled into the culvert, making himself as small as possible. He rested the barrel of his M1 on the edge, using a clump of weeds for minimal camouflage. He took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and settled the front sight post on the lead German soldier, a sergeant urging his men forward. The range was less than 70 yards. He squeezed the trigger. Crack of the 36 round was shockingly loud. The German sergeant dropped. The column froze. Heads turned, trying to locate the source of the shot. Kowalski worked the bolt automatically, the spent clip pinging out. He fired again. Another German fell. Now, confusion turned to alarm. The Germans dove for cover on the bridge itself, behind the stone railings. The advance halted. The Panzer IV on the far side stopped, its commander unsure of what was happening. Kowalski had just bought his first precious minute. He ducked down, changed position within the culvert by crawling 5 feet, and popped up again. He saw a German trying to set up an MG-42 on the bridge deck. He fired. A miss. The German ducked. Kowalski fired again. The machine gunner's assistant crumpled. For the next 20 minutes, a surreal duel unfolded. Every time a German soldier attempted to move or set up a weapon on the bridge, a single rifle shot would ring out from the seemingly empty American side of the river. Kowalski was a ghost, a phantom sniper. He never fired rapidly. He waited. He watched. He made every shot count. He created the illusion that the bridge was still covered by a determined, hidden defense. The German infantry, pinned on the exposed stone span, grew increasingly hesitant. Officers shouted orders, but no one was eager to be the next target of this invisible marksman. The critical Panzer IV, its commander wary of hidden anti-tank teams, refused to advance onto the bridge without infantry clearing the far side first. A traffic jam of German vehicles began to build on the eastern approach, a perfect target for American artillery, if anyone could call it in. Kowalski, alone in his ditch, had not just delayed the German advance, he had paralyzed its point of attack. By 13:30 hours, the German commanders, frustrated by the holdup, decided on a more aggressive solution. They began to deploy mortars on the eastern bank. The first ranging rounds began to walk across the field between the culvert and the village. Crump, crump, crump. Dirt and stone fragments rained down around Kowalski's position. Then, a squad of German infantry, having worked their way downstream, attempted to cross the river at a shallow point, outflanking the mysterious sniper's position. Kowalski, from his low vantage, spotted the movement. He had one grenade left. He had used the other to dissuade an earlier probing attempt. He was down to 3 rounds in his Garand. Ricci was semi-conscious beside him, groaning softly. The crisis was total. The mortar barrage was getting closer. Once the flanking squad got across, he would be caught in a crossfire. And if the mortars found his exact position, it was all over. He had delayed them for over an hour, an incredible feat, but it was about to end. The weight of the entire German division was finally about to crush his tiny, insignificant position. He looked at Ricci. He looked at his near-empty rifle. A profound sense of isolation washed over him. The sounds of battle in the village behind him seemed distant, unrelated to his hopeless fight. He was a speck, about to be erased. The logical end was minutes away. He prepared to make his last stand, to fire his final 3 rounds and then use his bayonet. He thought of his parents in Buffalo, of the bakery they ran. The absurd normalcy of that memory made his current reality even more horrific. But then, a new sound cut through the din of German mortars and small arms fire. It started as a deep, whistling shriek from the west, growing rapidly into an earth-shattering roar. It wasn't incoming fire. It was outgoing American artillery. A salvo of 105mm shells from the 83rd Division supporting artillery battalion screamed overhead and slammed into the tree line on the eastern bank, right where the German mortar positions and the massed vehicle. The explosions were cataclysmic. Trees were snapped like matchsticks. The truck erupted in a fireball. The German mortar fire ceased abruptly. In the village, Captain Miller, realizing the Germans were bottled up at the bridge, had finally managed to get a clear radio call through to the artillery observers. He had given them the coordinates of the eastern approach, now jammed with targets thanks to Kowalski's delaying action. The barrage was perfectly timed and devastatingly effective. The German advance disintegrated into chaos. The Panzer IV, now fearing it was the next target, began to reverse off the bridge approach. The infantry on the bridge, terrified of being caught in the open during an artillery storm, began to scramble back the way they had come. Kowalski, from his culvert, watched in stunned awe as the tide of battle turned before his eyes. The immediate pressure on him lifted, but the larger German force was still there, milling in confusion on the far bank. They would regroup. They would find another crossing point. His delaying action had granted a reprieve, not a victory. He needed to get Ricci out, and he needed to inform his company that the bridge, for the moment, was clear of enemy troops, but that major force was still poised to attack. He faced a new crisis, a 200-yard sprint across open ground, under potential fire, dragging a wounded man. It seemed almost as impossible as holding the bridge had been. Kowalski's mind, having just orchestrated a defensive masterpiece, now shifted to the problem of extraction. The American artillery had shifted its fire, walking it further east to disrupt German attempts to reorganize. This created a window of relative quiet directly around the bridge and the field leading to the village. He knew this window would slam shut the moment the Germans realized the defense on this side consisted of one man in a ditch. He had to move now. He slung his M1 over his shoulder. He looked at Joe Ricci. "Joe, we're going home. Well, you gotta help me. I need you to try and standard." Ricci, bleary from morphine and blood loss, nodded weakly. With tremendous effort, Kowalski hauled his friend out of the culvert and got him into a standing position, draping Ricci's arm over his own shoulders. They were now exposed. The field before them was a torn-up no-man's land of shell craters and trampled grass. The nearest cover was the corner of a stone barn, 60 yards away. It might as well have been a mile. "Ready? We go on 3. 1, 2, 3. They stumbled forward, Kowalski half carrying, half dragging his friend. Every step was agony for Ricci. Every second stretched into an eternity for Kowalski, expecting at any moment to feel the punch of a bullet or hear the crack of a sniper's rifle. They were two painfully slow, vulnerable figures in a vast, empty field. From the village, a young American private named Daniels, manning an observation post in a second-story window, saw them. He couldn't believe his eyes. "Lieutenant, there's two guys out in the field, by the bridge. One's hurt." Lieutenant Avery rushed to the window. He recognized Kowalski. Good God, he's alive, covering fire. "Now, everyone on that eastern tree line," he screamed. A dozen American rifles and a Browning automatic rifle opened up from the village windows, not aimed at anything specific, but throwing a wall of lead towards the distant German positions to suppress any potential shooters. The desperate sprint seemed to last forever. Kowalski's lungs burned. Ricci's weight threatened to pull them both down. They staggered past a shell crater, then another. 10 yards from the barn. 5. With a final, heaving lunge, Kowalski collapsed with Ricci behind the sturdy stone wall of the barn, gasping for air. They were safe for the moment. But Kowalski's job wasn't done. He propped Ricci against the wall. "Medic," he shouted towards the village. Then, ignoring his own exhaustion, he scrambled to the corner of the barn. He saw Lieutenant Avery and two other soldiers running in a crouch towards his position. He waved them over. When Avery arrived, Kowalski didn't offer a dramatic speech. He gave a crisp, combat-effective report. "Sir, bridge is clear of enemy infantry. They pulled back under our artillery. At least one Panzer IV on the far side, maybe more. They have mortars, now suppressed. Main column is bunched up on the eastern approach road, taking artillery fire. They'll likely try to find a ford downstream, sir. Maybe a kilometer south." Avery stared at him, then at the distant, smoking bridge. "Kowalski, how many were out there with you?" Kowalski met his gaze, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. "Just me and Ricci, sir. The others did make it off the bridge." The lieutenant was speechless. The sheer, audacious scale of what this one private had accomplished and survived was incomprehensible. He clapped Kowalski on the shoulder, a gesture of profound respect. "Medics are coming. Get your friend back. You've done enough for today, soldier. More than enough." But even as he spoke, the tactical wheels were turning. Kowalski's report was gold. The enemy was vulnerable, confused, and bottled up. Captain Miller, receiving the information, immediately requested a heavier, sustained artillery bombardment on the stalled column. He also dispatched a patrol to scout the downstream area Kowalski had mentioned, to intercept any German flanking movement. The intelligence provided by the lone rifleman transformed the American defense from a desperate holding action into an active, aggressive counterpunch. The aftermath of the battle for Kleindorf was decisive. The sustained American artillery fire, directed at the congested German column, caused horrific casualties and destroyed dozens of vehicles. The 11th Panzer Division's retreat was shattered at the Saal River. Unable to force a crossing at the defended bridge and harried by artillery, the division's remnants were forced to abandon their heavy equipment and scatter into the woods, ceasing to exist as a coherent fighting force. The 331st Infantry Regiment suffered 22 casualties in the day's fighting, most during the initial defense and withdrawal from the bridgehead. German losses were estimated at over 150 killed and wounded, with countless vehicles and weapons destroyed or abandoned. For Company G, the day was saved, and every man in the company knew who was responsible. PFC Leonard Kowalski was immediately put in for the Medal of Honor. The recommendation, signed by Lieutenant Avery, Captain Miller, and the battalion commander, detailed his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. It described his voluntary decision to remain behind with a wounded comrade, his deliberate and effective solo engagement of a vastly superior enemy force, his accurate reporting of enemy dispositions, and his successful evacuation of the wounded man under fire. The Medal of Honor was approved and presented to him by General William H. Simpson, commander of the Ninth Army, in a ceremony in July 1945. Joe Ricci survived his wounds and recovered. The two men remained friends for life. Leonard Kowalski returned to Buffalo after the war, shunning the spotlight. He worked in his family's bakery, raised a family, and rarely spoke of that afternoon at the Saal River Bridge. When asked, he would simply say, I was just doing my job, and I couldn't leave Joe. His story, however, endures as a quintessential example of the impact of the individual soldier. He was not a general, not a strategist. He was a rifleman. But in a moment of supreme crisis, he assessed the battlefield, understood the value of the ground he held, and used his skill and courage to create a strategic effect far outweighing his solitary presence. He didn't just delay a division. He disrupted its command, demoralized its lead elements, and created the precise conditions for his own side's artillery to deliver a knockout blow. He proved that willpower, applied with precision at a critical bottleneck, could alter the course of an engagement. He held the line, alone, until the line could be reinforced and the enemy broken. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WWII-Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.